Alright, so now that we've got our donut, we've got it frosted, we've got it, the cake texture part of it, but it looks very smooth, and it doesn't look very detailed. So there's a few things we can do. One, we added a little bit of texture by sculpting a little bit of bumpiness in there, but we're not really seeing it because it has a generic lighting, and the material itself might not be showing that. So when I go down here, for one, my lighting presets, I can set up a different light scheme to show off what my donut looks like. Later on, we'll go over making your own lighting. And that actually doesn't look too bad, but you can see that the last one was default. And you can see, so there's these different moods and different lighting schemes to kind of show off what that donut might look like. Now, on top of that, you also have different materials you can choose as your base for this material. So right now it's using the default, but if I were to choose like, oh, if I made it the clay default, that actually doesn't look too bad. There's the chocolate, or, you know, sort of default, but with the texture, it's so shiny and stuff, it eats up stuff a lot. You know, so these basically are presets. The color of them are being overridden by the textures that I have. But they also have different properties of shininess and even stylized looks to them. But then there's ones down here that actually have reflections and stuff on them. Right? So if you want to, and we could tone that down, but it gives you an idea of like, oh, you know, if this was like, you know, really shiny or metallic, you know, or something to that nature, that you can add some of these different effects depending on the look that you're going for, right? But on top of that, that cake, I would really like to have some bumpiness to it. So I'm going to do a little trick, okay? I want to make a height map or a bump map. And the way a bump map works is it looks at what, if I were to look at this image as if it were grayscale, the pixels that are lighter would bump up, like the frosting parts, and then the darker areas would push inward. Okay, so let's do that before we mess too much with the lighting and stuff like that. So I'm going to go to this texture here. Let's make sure we hit save first, because all this stuff is still, a lot of it is in memory. So I'm going to save. I'm going to go to the cake, right click, and I'm going to say, let's export, let us see, we have lots of different options. I just want to export that one channel, which is the cake part. So we can export as a group merged, export channel merged, yes, well, yeah, why not? That'll bring over the frosting too, but that should be okay. Let's try that. And I'm going to export this out as donut 1 color. Now that I've exported that out, let's see what it sent out so we could take a look at it. So we exported that one out. If I right click on it, or export selected, let's do that one too. Donut color cake. So you can see the difference. Copy, save. So I exported 2 of them. This was the first one. This is the texture file for it. So there's my frosting. There's my cake part. If I just wanted the cake part, this is the cake part minus the frosting. So that's how you'd separate them individually. Now, in here, we're just using diffuse, which is color. But if I go in and add, let's right click and say we want to import a layer. And right now it's going into diffuse. So before we do that, let's make a new layer. We'll call it bump. And we'll, instead of diffuse, we want a bump map. Now in there, now that I have a bump channel, I can import a layer. And even though this is color, it's just going to look at it as it's going to look at it solely as a grayscale image. And like I said, the light areas are going to bump up, the dark areas will bump down. So if I just go, let's say, with the color one. Yes, as a bump map. Boom, look at that. And the cool part is I can now tone that down, you see? But that's my bump map. Now when I change my lighting, you can really start to see that bumpiness now. I can adjust portions of that image, but it is somewhat limited. There are other programs that are a little more powerful, like Substance Painter, which I really wish we had, but I can adjust the color and the contrast of it if I want to bounce things out, or I could just go in and then essentially change its intensity. You don't want it like super hot, so I just want to get a little bit of bump in there so that's, you know, it looks cakey. And so depending on my lighting, you're going to see it differently. And the lighting will also work with which material you chose. So as you swap between some of these different materials, let me just find one that's okay. Depending on the complexity of that material, it's going to change the look. So the lighting and what kind of material it is work together. So whether it's reflective or just shiny, and you can decide. And you can even mask out those areas. So this becomes a very important part, you know, of how you want to render this. I like that one. But the last thing is the shine is a little bit much. So the last one before we render will be just adjusting the shine, and then also adding little details like if you wanted to put sprinkles. But that actually looks pretty good. Shiny, but good. We'll tone that down.